Hello, everyone. Today, I've decided to discuss a common topic in video games is how writing and voice acting evolved with them over time. The thing is with the voice acting is it really wasn't until the 90s where voice acting was really included in video games. I'm not sure if there was anything attempted in the 80s or even 70s that was even possible at the time, but I'll get to voice acting later. Let's talk with writing. Obviously, the earliest video games, it was common to not have writing at all. Maybe you played a sports game, maybe you had a Pong game or something like that. Just gameplay, no story. Or maybe you take a story that's already well known and just work with the gameplay on that, like a lot of movie adaptation video games do. But one thing that you can really notice is, with Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, two properties that had remakes in the last couple years. The writing for those games are both a time capsule, and there's a bizarre charm when you have these modern video games that retell this very 90s base level writing to where actually let's take a detour. When I think of a franchise that never really changed the way it writes its stories, I think of Mario, because Mario, the very first game, arcade game, Donkey Kong, was practically no story. You just save a woman from an ape, that's it. And then you have Mario Bros. I can't remember what the story of that is. I don't even know if there is one. But when you have Mario 64, you just have save Princess Peach from Bowser. That's it. And the only type of story is just there to set up the levels and the worlds. That's it. That's really all you have. And Mario didn't really change this at all when proceeding the games. I think there was really one true attempt to incorporate full-fledged voice acting in a story. It was Super Mario Sunshine. And it was considered a good game, but had pretty fun gameplay. But the story and voice acting was considered the worst part of it, to where it didn't even hold up back then. Where the voice acting is very embarrassing. So I think I want to play the game once just to see what the voice acting is like. But if I ever play it a second time, I'm definitely skipping the cutscenes if I can. So, but after that, they just reverted back to minimal story, just focusing strictly on gameplay. And the other interesting thing with Mario is the way the voice acting is done, where outside of Sunshine, the characters rarely say actual words, and it's just gibberish, and the text is translated based on the language, so they can keep one voice acting track that features both American and Japanese actors across the board, and you can usually tell which based off of how the characters sound. So Mario is one those games where it's timeless way of telling its stories. It's always the same. You just have minimal story to set up these levels. Same with Crash and Spyro. Both really had similar ways of doing so, just with full-fledged voice acting. Crash Bandicoot has a very simple setup for its story. You introduce yourself in media res to these scientists that have already experimented on a lot of animals. You don't know much about them, except that they're trying to turn a bandicoot into a general. Then it escapes, and you see that they have a female bandicoot that's still under capture, and that's Crash's main goal, just to rescue her and put an end to the scientist's plan. That's all you have for a story. It's very simple. And the opening cutscene isn't that long. and it sets you up in the gameplay as soon as it can. Actually, the opening cutscene, like, it doesn't play in the original game unless you're at the pause menu and wait for a little bit. I made that mistake when I played through it. I didn't actually see the opening cutscene until I finished the game, which I'd seen it on YouTube, so I already knew what was in it, but I digress. That's like one fix to the N. Sane Trilogy. They actually play the opening cutscene when you start the game. And if anything, I saw that version before seeing the original, because I really knew nothing about the original game or the second game before playing the N. Sane Trilogy versions of them. Not much to ruin, I guess. Well, the thing is, I'd say that the second game does have a little more story than the first, but most of it is like setting up like what you have to do in levels and the boss fights. That's really it. Third game, kind of the same, but there's more like threats from the bosses before you actually battle them. Then you have Spyro. Like the first game, incredibly quick. You introduce a world of dragons, you introduce a villain, he's insulted and turns them all to crystal. That's all you got. And every dragon you rescue gives you some more information. Usually tips or just some quirky comments. That's all you got. Gameplay based. That's all you got. Second game has a lot more story, actually. It takes a little more to explain. Spyro decides to go for a portal to Dragon Shores for a vacation, but the portal is intercepted and it takes him to Avalar, which is a world that has no dragons. And he was summoned there because the world has been overtaken by a dinosaur anthro thing named Ripto and his two henchmen. And that's... you have to collect things to get the chance to fight them. So, it took a little bit, but still pretty simple. Third game, I'd say same level of simplicity. Dragon eggs are stolen, taken to the other side of the world, where dragons aren't there. Spyro has to head through to get there, and just collect the eggs. Actually, that's much less time, but there's a lot of character development that happens between cutscenes. But most notably, the biggest time capsule for both Crash and Spyro is the dialogue, where I'd say Crash's dialogue isn't that much of a time capsule, I'd suppose, maybe. Spyro definitely is, especially the first game. The way the lines are written in the game is just not done anymore, at all. It was a very, very late 90s thing of how dialogue was written then. It's just very different. So, you have these new remake games just reinterpreting that old dialogue, and it's very bizarre to me. I think others might think differently, but for me it's always odd hearing this dialogue read out in a modern game these days, because modern games have really evolved in how they write. So now I'm going to introduce voice acting. I already mentioned with Mario there's nothing to say about that, because it's one voice acting track. I'm going to stick to English language tracks only. The one plus with video games is that they hire professional voice actors for many of the characters, across both Crash and Spyro. And it was a medium that was pretty new with full-fledged voice acting, and it was not really known what you could really do and what was acceptable. Like, the voice acting in Spyro and Crash, while not bad, and have professionals, it definitely shows its age, just based off the line delivery and the compression on the quality to where it sounds like they're using bad microphones. But I always give props to where they did try their best with these professionals. Where it's like, the new games, like the Crash remake has pretty solid voice acting for having like an entirely new cast and doing a good job reinterpreting these lines for a new era. Spyro, on the other hand, its voice acting has mixed opinions. Some like it, some don't. And I kind of feel like I'm in the middle with it. Like, the first two games, I was more open for how lines would be delivered. Third game, not so much, because it was my personal favorite game. And one I had already played a really long time ago, so there was nostalgia goggles. And so I've been pointing out there's a lot of scenery chewing with the dialogue in the new games that wasn't done in the Insane Trilogy. At least not that I can remember. So with that being said, Spyro and Crash remakes definitely have time capsule aspects to them with both writing and dialogue. But I would say that for Spyro, while the gameplay is a lot more fun and holds up a lot better than the Crash games do, not to say those are bad, but you can tell they're 90s in terms of gameplay. Spyro's actual writing and dialogue definitely shows that it's from another time, and that we are lucky that the original games had amazing gameplay beyond belief, as well as amazing character designs. Because if I was a child playing the remake for the first time without playing the originals, I might definitely have nostalgia for them, because when you're a child you don't know what's acceptable writing and acting, but designs are a different story. So that being said, I think it's very interesting to see how writing in video games and voice acting has evolved, especially with new technology and with other things. And it's nice to see what you can do in the future. Because 10 years from now, this is going to be a different landscape, especially with virtual reality becoming more and more advanced. Alright. Have a good day, everyone.